Hello everyone, my name is Robert Chalmers and welcome back to my YouTube channel, Escaping Christianity. I hope everyone is doing well. And the purpose of today's video is there was one very important thing that I forgot to mention in yesterday's video. So this is kind of an addendum to that. And it's very critical, and so I need to mention it. So I have, you know how yesterday I talked about Luke 21, which is the Olivet Discourse in Luke's version, and I talked about verses 25 and 26. And in these two verses, which I have up on the screen, it says, "You'll see signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars." And full preterists will claim that I don't understand apocalyptic language, and that the second coming of 70 AD was only for Jerusalem, or the second coming of Jesus in 70 AD, it was only for Old Covenant Israel to destroy them for rejecting Jesus and to destroy the temple, and it was just a localized judgment. That's what they will claim, and they will say apocalyptic language like this, where it says the sun, moon, and stars, proves that. Well, I want to point out that full preterists, and this is what I should have said yesterday, they misapply this apocalyptic language. They misapply it. What do I mean by that? I'm gonna show what I mean here in just a second. But one thing that I want to point out here is that in verse 25, it says nations plural, and that is the Greek word ethnos, and this is used in the Bible for Gentile nations. So Luke is using it in a fashion to describe all the nations of the world. But this apocalyptic language, I want to go to Isaiah 13 really quick. And this is where full preterists will say I don't understand. But I used to be a Christian and a full preterist, and if you watch the first 24 videos on my channel when I was still a Christian, I talk about this apocalyptic language, so I definitely understand it. What I'm saying is full preterists misapply it to try to get a localized judgment in 70 AD for the second coming of Jesus, and it won't work. They're misapplying it, and I'm going to show that right now. In verse 10 here of Isaiah 13, and Isaiah 13 is about the fall of Babylon. And in verse 10 it says, "The stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light." Oh, that sounds like what we just read in Luke 20:21 and Matthew 24. "Not give their light, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not cause its light to shine." Very similar to what you hear Jesus saying in the Olivet Discourse. And they will say that is for the fall of Israel, the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, because that's how Isaiah uses it here in Isaiah 13 for the fall of Babylon. The universe didn't fall apart when Babylon was destroyed. That's what full preterists will say. They'll say this is poetic language, and it is by Isaiah. Isaiah is using it in a poetic way to say that for Babylon, it's like the end of their world. And so the sun's going dark, the stars are falling from heaven, because it's the end of the world for the nation of Babylon. So he's using it in a non-literal poetic sense. And so when we go back to Luke 21, full preterists will say in verse 25, when you see signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, that this is referring to, in a poetic way, a non-literal way. It's not the destruction of the universe. It's the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Okay, the argument sounds pretty good, right? But they're misapplying it, and I'm going to show why right in just a second. I want to look at Matthew 24 really quick. Matthew 24, verse 30. This is the second coming in Matthew's version of the Olivet Discourse. And it says they will see this in verse 30. "The sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn." Now, full preterists will say, whenever you see gay, which is the word for earth here in verse 30, that means the land, because it can be translated as that. And the land means the land of Israel. And notice how it says tribes here. And so full preterists love to say that's the 12 tribes of Israel, the land of Israel, being destroyed in 70 AD at Christ's second coming. Sounds pretty good, right? Sounds convincing, but it's wrong, and I'll show that in a second. And when you go to Revelation, whenever you see the Greek word gay for earth, throughout the book of Revelation, that should be translated as land, meaning the land of Israel, and its destruction at the second coming of Jesus for rejecting him, and that would happen to them in 70 AD when their temple was destroyed. This is what full preterists will say. So it's a very convincing argument if you're not careful. I just want to point out in Mark's version of the Olivet Discourse, he doesn't use gay for the second coming. You won't find the word there. because Mark is writing to Gentiles mostly. Matthew is writing to Jews, and so he uses this language here. But in Luke's version, Luke believes it's going to happen to the whole world, and I'm going to show that right now. And here's the main point of this video. Even if you take the full preterist position and you say this is non-literal apocalyptic language, and just like it meant the fall of Babylon in Isaiah 13, that in the Olivet Discourse it means the fall of Jerusalem and the end of Old Covenant Israel, even if you interpret Luke this way, it still destroys full preterism. Why? Because when you get to verse 25, there will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. And notice, at the end of verse 26 and verse 27, the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. That's exactly what Matthew and Mark say about the second coming. So this is, the real deal. They will say, in verse 25, full preterists will say, the signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, that's apocalyptic language for the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. I'm going to point out why they're misapplying it. It says the earth, that's the Greek word gay, and they'll say, see, that's the land of Israel. But Luke says the distress of nations, plural, which is the Greek word ethnos, which is used for Gentile nations. But the killer, on top of that, is that in verse 26, where you see the word earth, again, it's not gay anymore, it's oikomene, which means the known inhabited world. It means the Roman Empire. That's how it was used in the first century. So even if you interpret it the way full preterists want you to, where they try to say it's about the destruction of national Israel in 70 AD, because that's how Isaiah 13 uses it for Babylon, then what Luke is saying here, even if you interpret it the way full preterists want, when Luke uses oikomene here in verse 26, he's saying all the nations of the whole inhabited world of the Roman Empire are going to fall at the second coming of Jesus. That's why he uses oikomene. If he just thought it was for Jerusalem in 70 AD, he should have continued to use the word gay like he did in verse 25. But he doesn't, and he uses gay in verse 25 here because he thinks it's a cosmic worldwide thing, that it's actual cosmic upheaval. But even if you interpret it the full preterist way, the fact that he changes the word for earth from gay to oikomene in verse 26 proves that he thought it was the whole world. And all the nations did not fall in 70 AD. The entire Roman Empire and all the nations of the inhabited world didn't fall in 70 AD. And so this proves the full preterist interpretation is wrong. It's fatal for it, and it's fatal for Christianity, because when you go down to verse 32, Jesus says all these things will happen to this generation, and he's describing the temple's destruction as part of that. And so if it's all and not just some, the only generation it can be is the disciples' generation. And then on top of this, Luke writes not only this gospel, he writes the book of Acts. And in Acts 17, he has Paul giving the speech at the Areopagus, which we talked about in the last video. And he has Paul saying in Acts 17 that God has commanded all men everywhere to repent, and Paul is preaching to Stoics and Epicureans and Greek philosophers, a very Gentile world. And Acts comes after what Luke wrote here in Luke 21. So he's just confirming it even more in Acts, that this is a worldwide judgment. And even if you try to interpret it as a fall of a nation, by Luke using oikomene in verse 26, he's saying all the nations of the world will fall. Now, I don't think he means it that way. I think he means it as cosmic upheaval. And yeah, all these cosmic disturbances, everybody's going to fall anyway. So yeah, he means it that way. But I'm saying if you interpret it the full preterist way as the fall of a nation, oikomene proves that Luke thought it was for all the nations. All the nations would fall because it's cosmic upheaval, and it's the end of the world for everybody. There's going to be judgment for everyone. So hopefully I said that clearly enough. And I wanted to point that out, that even if you try to interpret it the way full preterists want, it destroys full preterism, and it's fatal for Christianity too. So anyways, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. And if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I would really, really appreciate that. Other than that, please take care, and I will talk to you guys next time.